The first thing I did is unscrew the bottom screws of the wheel. These are so we can access the plugs for the paddles in order to detach those. You can see here I'm using a seat cushion just so I don't damage the wheel whilst I'm messing around with it. So then this bottom section comes off. We unplug carefully the APM plugs, and then we can set about unscrewing the APM. The advanced power module has 2 screws on each side, so taking that off isn't so bad. But we have to try and carefully tease the wires out. Find that the strong magnets end up meaning the screws end up sticking the shifter, but you can remove those afterwards. You should have to be a little bit more careful when you're putting it back on later. You see here I had a little bit of difficulty getting the wire out. I used the Allen key to try and just hook the wire out of the way. Next up, we start unscrewing these very tight screws that surround the wheel. And we've got 6 of these to remove on the front. Got some Loctite or something on there that just makes them very difficult to take off. Just that initial friction. Also see I'm using a magnetic screw organizer for this just so I don't lose track of which screws go where. But any place you can store those screws safely would be a good idea. I found it quite interesting that the top screws are self-tappers. And now we've got to do the top ones at the back. And this effectively loosens up the housing. We remove these ones on the corner of the grips. Now the whole of this back plate now can be taken off. Before we do that, let's unscrew the grips. 6 in total, so it takes a bit of time to get through them. There's no hurry. We can slowly tease off the front of the grip. I found actually it was quite difficult to do. It seemed to stick quite hard, so on the other side I actually used a pry tool to just help it along a little bit. So flip it back on its back, and then we should be able to take the entire rear housing off. See the lovely PCB. You have to be careful of that ribbon cable. Let's just flip it back to the front. We want to just tease out the rumble motors, the haptic feedback motors, whatever you want to call them. Using a bit of foam here just to protect the wheel from the quick release, the PCB of the wheel. And now I've got the job of trying to get the rear off. I tried loosening it whilst I was facing the front, but it was easier just to turn it around and then slowly tease it out. You have to be careful because the rumble motors are stuck to it here. So you want to feed the motor through, so from the front to the back. That allows you to get a bit more room in order to start pulling off these little glued on bits. They're holding the wire in place. So you can remove those, be careful of the wire, it's easily damaged, and then do the same on the other side. On the first side of this, I found it very easy to take the glue dots off, but it's much harder on this side. They were well on there. Having had practice from the first side, I dealt with those pretty quickly. So that's the grips off. Now all we need to do is start reassembling. The first thing I did here was to route the cable for the haptic motor through the channels that are provided in the new grips. Use the pry tool to just try and push them in so they held in place. And as soon as I was happy with their placement, I flipped the grip around. And then slowly got it to sit in. I had to wiggle the motor in just to be able to fit it into the original seating position. But I found that to be the easiest way to get the rear of the grip back on. I tried doing it on the other side without putting in the motor first, and realised my folly pretty early on. It's very difficult to actually get it in place. So once we've got the rear of the grip in place, we can put in the strengthening posts and put on the front of the grip. Then we have the free supplied screws that we can just put in. So that these are the screws that came with the pineapple grips. I didn't over tighten it straight away because I wanted to make sure I could check clearance of cables underneath later on. So once the grips are on, before putting the rear housing on, make sure that you haven't got your haptic cables stressed in any way from the grips. I found that actually on one side I had pinched the cable, so I had to loosen it back off and tuck that cable back in before tightening up. That's just a case of doing the reverse of what you did before. Getting the rear housing in place, popping in the 4 screws on the back, then the 6 that you removed from the front, excluding the ones at the bottom, because you've got to put your shifters back on. We have the delicate task of getting the shifters back in. Again, I use an Allen key here just to help feed cable through. I also use the pry tool. Multifunction tools, I like to call them. We put in the 2 bolts. Which you found that the ball-ended Allen key that Fanatec give you doesn't hold the bolt in captive enough, and then you end up having the strong magnetic forces from the shifters pulling them back out. So I used a secondary Allen key that I had around to poke it in, or you could use the shorter end, just not the ball end. A bit of a tight squeeze to get these cables in, but generally don't plug them in until I've got both shifters in place. So once the shifters are in, plug them back in, screw on the back panel, and now you have a fully upgraded pineapple grips based wheel. You've earned yourself a nice cup of tea, and then you can go for a nice race. Pineapple grips, they give you all of this information that I've gone through on installation in a nice handy page. And then once you've got to the point that you are putting on the grips, essentially after that it's just reverse the whole process again.